I had come home early from the office that Tuesday afternoon because my 3 o'clock had canceled, a routine estate review for an elderly couple in Pooler. I'd driven back through the Spanish moss-draped streets of Savannah without calling ahead, without announcing myself, because after 16 years of marriage, I had never once thought I needed to. I was still holding my briefcase when I heard Cordelia's voice, bright and sharp and completely unguarded, floating through the crack in the kitchen door. "Naomi, listen to me," she was saying, and she was laughing. That particular laugh, the one she only used with her sisters, high and careless, like a woman who is absolutely certain no one important is listening. "Once the papers are filed, I'll bleed his accounts dry. The man has been building that practice for 27 years. That's 27 years I'm entitled to walk away with." I stood in the hallway of the house I'd paid for, in the city I'd built my career in, and I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. "Sloan agrees," Cordelia continued. "His whole life is tied up in that firm. Half of Savannah's old money runs through his office. Honey, we are talking about a very comfortable settlement." She laughed again, and in that laugh was everything I needed to know about the last 16 years. "My name is Augustine Mercer. I am 52 years old. I have spent the better part of 3 decades as an estate planning attorney in Savannah, Georgia, one of the oldest, most tradition-bound cities in the American South. I specialize in family trusts, inheritance law, and the kind of quiet, careful work that determines what happens to everything a person builds when they are finally gone. The profound irony of my situation, and I say this as a man who has spent his entire career elbow-deep in exactly this kind of legal instrument, is that the document about to change everything in that will reading room was one I had helped construct myself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Brunswick, Georgia, 45 minutes south of Savannah, the son of a postal worker and a school librarian. My parents were not wealthy people. They were careful people. My father tracked every dollar in a composition notebook he kept in his breast pocket. My mother used to say that the most important thing a person could do was understand exactly what they owned and exactly what they owed, and to never confuse the two. That philosophy became my career. I put myself through the University of Georgia on loans and a partial scholarship, graduated in the top 10% of my law school class, and came to Savannah at 25 with a used Ford pickup and a job offer from a small firm on Drayton Street. I made partner in 7 years. I started my own practice, Mercer Estate Law, at 34. By the time I was 40, I had handled the estates of some of the oldest families in the city. The Ballard Trust, the Whitmore family succession, 3 generations of the Hargrove textile legacy, which stretched from a cotton warehouse near River Street all the way to commercial properties in Atlanta. I was not flashy. I drove a sensible car. I wore conservative suits. I gave measured advice and I charged fair fees, and I was known, above all things, as a man who could be trusted with secrets. Because that is what estate law is, at its core. It is the business of secrets. When someone places their life's work into a trust document, they are handing you the most vulnerable version of themselves, their fears, their regrets, the things they want their children to have, and the things they desperately want to keep from them. You learn, in this profession, to read people with a precision that most people reserve for contracts, which is why it took me so long to read Cordelia correctly. We met 16 years ago at a fundraiser for the Telfair Museum on Barnard Street, the kind of Savannah evening where champagne is warm and conversation is practiced. She was 31, an events coordinator for one of the historic hotels on Bull Street, possessed of the kind of effortless southern charm that makes a room rearrange itself around her. Dark hair, green eyes, a laugh that made you feel like you were the funniest person she'd ever met. I was 45, recently widowed after a brief and genuinely happy first marriage, and completely unprepared for what she was. We were married, within a year. The ceremony was at a small chapel on Monterey Square. Her mother, Evelyn Dre, sat in the front pew and wept with a quiet, dignified kind of happiness that I found immediately reassuring. Because Evelyn was, in truth, the person I fell in love with first. Not romantically. I want to be absolutely clear about that. But from the first moment I met her, at a Sunday dinner in Cordelia's family home, out in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, I recognized something in Evelyn Dre that I recognized in very few people. She was precise. She was observant. She said exactly what she meant and nothing more. She reminded me, in the best possible way, of my own mother. Evelyn was 68 when Cordelia and I married, a retired high school principal who had raised 3 daughters, Cordelia, Naomi, and Sloane, largely on her own after her husband died of a heart attack when the girls were young. She had done it without complaint, without drama, and with a thorough organizational competence that I deeply respected. Her house was paid off. Her savings were modest but disciplined. She had a small retirement account, a life insurance policy, and a collection of antique jewelry that had been in her family for 4 generations. 6 years into my marriage with Cordelia, Evelyn came to my office. She sat across from my desk, the same desk where I'd reviewed hundreds of estates, and said without any preamble, "Augustine, I need you to help me put my affairs in order, and I need to know that what I'm doing is legal, fair, and impossible to challenge." I told her I could help with all 3. What followed was 3 years of careful, meticulous work. Estate planning is never fast when done correctly. We talked about what she had, what she wanted to happen to it, and, critically, who she trusted to see those wishes through. "I love my daughters," Evelyn told me during one of our early sessions, her hands folded precisely on the edge of my desk. "But love and trust are not the same thing, Augustine. You of all people should know that." I did know that. I just hadn't yet applied that knowledge to my own marriage. Looking back, the signs had been there for at least 2 years before that Tuesday in the hallway. Cordelia's phone, face down on the kitchen counter whenever I walked in. Business trips to Atlanta and Charleston that she described in the vaguest possible terms. A new intentionality in her appearance. She had always been beautiful, but now there was something different to it. The kind of care a woman takes when she is being looked at by someone other than her husband. I noticed these things. I am a man who notices things. But I had also spent 30 years in a profession that required me to move slowly, gather evidence, and never act on incomplete information. So I noticed. I filed. I waited. The phone call in the kitchen was not the first piece of evidence. It was simply the piece that brought everything else into sharp, irreversible focus. After I heard Cordelia's laughter dissolve back into the ordinary sounds of a weekday afternoon, I went quietly back out the front door, got into my car, and drove to Forsyth Park. I sat on a bench near the fountain for 45 minutes, watching strangers walk their dogs and tourists photograph the Spanish moss, and I thought with the kind of cold, systematic clarity that had made me very good at my job. She was planning to file for divorce. She had already discussed it with both her sisters, which meant the decision was not new. It had simply not yet been announced to me. She believed my practice was exposed. She believed, as most people who have never read an estate plan in any detail tend to believe, that 27 years of accumulated professional assets were sitting unprotected in a joint account somewhere, waiting for a divorce attorney to divide them down the middle. She did not know, because she had never asked, and I had never offered, that I had structured Mercer Estate Law as an irrevocable trust 9 years ago, with myself as the managing trustee, for exactly the kind of protection that my clients routinely sought from me. I had built my professional life into a legal architecture so solid that I had, on multiple occasions, used my own firm's structure as an illustration in client consultations. The irony of that, I allowed myself, was not entirely without its satisfactions. What Cordelia was planning to bleed was not a bank account. It was a trust document, and trust law is not a courtroom where charm and performance carry the day. It is a document, and I had written mine very, very carefully. I also thought, sitting there on that bench in Forsyth Park as the afternoon light shifted through the oak canopy, about Evelyn. Evelyn, who was 81 years old by then, and who had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure 14 months earlier. Evelyn, whose estate plan we had revised comprehensively twice in the past 3 years, with the last major update coming just 7 months before this afternoon. Evelyn, who had sat across from me in my office on the final day we reviewed her documents and said, with that characteristic economy of language, "Augustine, you are the only person in my life who has never tried to manage me. That is a very rare quality." Evelyn, who had asked me a question at the end of that final meeting that I had not fully understood at the time. If someone is named in a document, she had asked, studying her copy of the trust with those reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, and that person's circumstances change in ways that would disappoint me, is there a way to address that without rewriting everything from scratch? I had answered her professionally. I had explained the mechanisms available to her under Georgia law. I had drafted the language she requested with my usual care. Sitting in Forsyth Park, watching the fountain catch the late afternoon light, I finally understood exactly what she had been asking me. I went home that evening and said nothing. This is the part of the story that people find hardest to believe when I tell it. How do you sit across a dinner table from your wife, who has just told her sister she plans to take everything you've built, and say nothing? How do you pass the bread and ask about her day and go to sleep in the same bed, night after night? The answer is this. You have to understand that the confrontation you're imagining, the dramatic scene, the accusations, the tears, serves your emotions and absolutely no one else. A confrontation would have given Cordelia information. It would have told her I knew. It would have accelerated her timeline and given her the opportunity to position herself as the wronged party before I had time to understand the full picture. I have spent 30 years watching families tear themselves apart over estates. I have watched siblings who loved each other for decades become strangers over a disputed dining room table. I have watched carefully constructed legacies dissolve into legal fees because someone acted too quickly, too emotionally, before they understood every moving part. I was not going to make that mistake in my own life. So I did what I do. I gathered information. I consulted my own estate attorney, a colleague in Charleston named Barrett Hale, a man I trusted completely, who reviewed my firm's structure confidentially and confirmed what I already believed. My professional assets were protected. My personal retirement accounts and investment portfolio had been held in a separate revocable trust since the year Cordelia and I married, a precaution I had taken not out of suspicion, but out of professional habit. I had always believed that cobblers should give their own children proper shoes. What was legitimately marital property, after 16 years, was real but manageable. And then I began visiting Evelyn more frequently. She was declining. Her heart was failing with the quiet, implacable persistence of a tide going out. Some days she was sharp and funny and absolutely herself, her eyes tracking every nuance of a conversation with the alertness of someone who had spent 40 years managing rooms full of adolescents. Other days she tired quickly, and our time together was brief and gentle. But every time I came, she asked me to sit by her bedroom window that looked out over her backyard garden. The camellias she'd planted the year her husband died, now 20 feet tall and blooming pink every February. And she talked. She talked about her late husband Chester, who had proposed to her in the parking lot of a Dairy Queen because he'd lost his nerve at dinner. About raising 3 daughters on a principal's salary and her unshakable conviction that difficulty, properly metabolized, becomes strength. About her students, the ones she still thought about 40 years later, wondering where they had ended up and whether any of them had any idea what she'd seen in them. She never talked about Cordelia directly, neither did I. But there was one afternoon, about 6 weeks after the kitchen phone call, when Evelyn looked at me across her bedroom and said very quietly, "How are you, Augustine?" And I mean truly. I looked back at her for a long moment. "I'm being strategic," I said. She nodded, once, slowly, like someone confirming a calculation they'd already run in their head. "Good," she said, and we moved on. 3 months later, Evelyn Dray was admitted to Memorial Health University Medical Center. The congestive heart failure had progressed beyond what outpatient management could address. I visited her there twice in the last 2 weeks of her life. The second time she was tired, but completely herself. That particular kind of tired that is not confusion but clarity. The kind that comes when a person has done everything they intended to do and is simply waiting. She held my hand across the hospital blanket. "You were the right person," she said. It sounded like the final line of a conversation we had never quite had out loud. "I tried to be," I said. She died on a Thursday morning in early November, with Cordelia and her sisters at her bedside. I was at the office, managing a client matter that needed attention. When Cordelia called to tell me, her voice was soft and genuinely sad, and I answered with the appropriate words, because they were also genuinely meant. Whatever Cordelia had become, Evelyn's death was real. Grief is always real, even in people who are being dishonest about everything else. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks after Evelyn's passing, at the offices of Preston Wolf, an older Savannah attorney who had been handling Evelyn's personal legal matters for decades before she brought her estate planning work to me. Preston was 70, impeccably dressed, and possessed of the kind of professional reputation in this city that is built over a lifetime and defended every single day. He and I had known each other professionally for many years. We had referred clients to one another, We respected each other's work. The invitation was extended to Evelyn's 3 daughters and, as the named trustee in Evelyn's estate documents, to me. I want you to understand something about that room when we walked in. Cordelia, Naomi, and Sloane had dressed for the occasion with a particular energy I recognized the moment I saw them in Preston's waiting area. They were not dressed for grief. They were dressed for expectation. Cordelia wore a tailored black suit she reserved for occasions where she wanted to project authority. Naomi, who worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative in Atlanta and had driven up that morning, wore heels and carried a leather-bound notepad as though she intended to take notes on everything she was about to receive. Sloane, the youngest, the sharpest-tongued, the voice I had heard Cordelia speaking with in the kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, sat with her arms crossed and a particular tightness around her mouth that I have come to associate, in my professional experience, with people who have already mentally spent money they haven't yet received. I sat across the table from all 3 of them, in my usual dark suit, with my hands folded on the polished surface in front of me. Preston Wolfe settled his reading glasses on his nose and opened the document. He began with the standard language, the preamble that every will carries, the declarations of sound mind and disposing memory, the identification of the testator, the date of signing. This particular document had been signed, he noted carefully, 7 months ago, with proper witnesses and full notarization as Georgia law requires. I watched Cordelia's face while Preston read. She had a particular expression when she was waiting for something she wanted, a slight forward tilt of the chin, an almost imperceptible brightening behind the eyes. She was leaning into this reading the way you lean into the delivery of a gift you already believe you know the contents of. Evelyn's personal property, her jewelry, her furniture, the contents of her home, was distributed among the 3 daughters in specific and detailed bequests. Cordelia received her mother's emerald earrings, which had been a wedding gift from Chester, and the writing desk from the front parlor. Naomi received the dining room set and a particular strand of pearls their grandmother had brought from Savannah's old Jewish quarter, a family piece with real history. Sloane received the bedroom furniture and a set of crystal stemware that had survived 3 moves in 40 years. These things were not nothing. Evelyn had been precise and she had been thoughtful, but they were also not what Cordelia was waiting for. The real estate, the Ardsley Park home, paid off, conservatively valued at $400,000 in the current Savannah market, and the liquid assets, totaling nearly $1.8 million between savings accounts, investment accounts, and the life insurance payout, did not go to the daughters. Preston paused. He looked at the document. He looked at me. And then he said, in the measured, deliberate tone of a man being extremely careful, "I need to confirm. Is Augustine Mercer present?" "He's right there," Cordelia said, with a small frown that she didn't bother concealing. "He's my husband. Why?" "Yes," Preston said. He cleared his throat. He looked at the document one more time, the way professionals do when they want to be absolutely certain before they speak, because what they are about to say cannot be unsaid. Then he looked back up at the room. "I want to be precise about this," he said quietly, not dramatically, just carefully. The words of a man who had done this for 50 years and knew that precision right now was the only thing standing between this room and chaos. "I don't entirely understand the relational context. Who is he, in this room, in relation to this estate?" It was Sloane who answered before I could, her voice already carrying that particular edge that sounds like composure on its way to becoming something else entirely. "He's Cordelia's husband. What does that have to do with anything?" Preston set the document flat on the table. Evelyn's estate, the house, the liquid assets, everything she had spent 40 years building with the careful discipline of a woman who trusted compound interest more than chance, had been placed into a charitable remainder trust. The beneficiary of that trust, during the distribution phase, was the Savannah Education Foundation, a nonprofit that provided college scholarships to first-generation students in Chatham County. Students who looked, in many cases, exactly the way Evelyn Dray's own students had looked 40 years ago. Young people with ability and no resources, standing at the edge of something large. The sole trustee of that charitable remainder trust, with full administrative authority over all assets, all investment decisions, and all distributions for the duration of the trust's operation, was me. Not Cordelia, not her sisters, Not a bank or a corporate trustee or a law firm. Me, Augustine Mercer, the estate planning attorney, the son-in-law who had sat by Evelyn's window on late Sunday afternoons and talked about the difference between love and trust, and who had understood, far later than he should have, but not too late, exactly why she was asking. The room did not erupt. It sort of collapsed inward, quietly, like a structure whose load-bearing elements have been carefully and invisibly removed. Sloane found her voice first. "That can't be right." She said it the way people say things when the ground has moved beneath them and they need one more moment to pretend it hasn't. "The document is valid," Preston said, with the exact calibrated patience of a man who has managed difficult rooms for half a century. "It was properly executed under Georgia law. The trust structure is sound." Naomi was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize, somewhere between confusion and the dawning of something she didn't want to be dawning. Cordelia had gone completely still. I have seen this before, in clients, when the numbers in an estate don't add up to the number they had been carrying in their heads. There is a moment before the emotion arrives where the person is simply processing, where their entire understanding of a situation is restructuring itself, silently, like a building being quietly demolished from the inside. "She wouldn't," Cordelia said finally. Her voice was very controlled. "Mother wouldn't have done this without telling me." Preston opened a sealed envelope that had been paper-clipped to the back of the trust documentation. Evelyn's handwriting on the front, in the careful, upright script of a woman who had written on a blackboard for 4 decades. "For Cordelia, to be read at the time of distribution." He looked at me. I nodded. He unfolded the single page inside and read it aloud. Evelyn's voice, even through Preston's careful professional reading, was unmistakably hers. Precise, unhurried, absolutely certain of itself, in the way of a person who has had a long time to think about what they want to say, and has chosen every word with intention. She wrote that she loved her daughters fiercely and without condition. She wrote that she was proud of each of them in specific and genuine ways she named, individually, with the thoroughness of a woman who understood that generalities are a form of laziness, and that the people we love deserve better than that. She wrote that she had spent her adult life building something modest but real, and that in her final years she had come to understand that what she'd built should serve something larger than inheritance, that the scholarships the foundation would provide would carry her name and her values forward into the lives of people who needed them the way she had once needed someone to believe in them. And then, near the end of the letter, she addressed Cordelia directly. I watched my wife's face while Preston read this part. Evelyn had written, "I am placing this trust in Augustine's hands because he is the only person in my life who never wanted anything from me, except the privilege of doing his job well. He has never been anything other than honest with me. I know that what I am asking of you, Cordelia, is to accept a decision you did not make. I hope, in time, you will understand why I made it. Some things are not given. They are earned. Augustine earned this." Naomi made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a sharp intake of breath. Sloane stared at the table. Cordelia did not move. Then she turned and looked at me, and I looked back at her. Not with triumph, not with coldness, with the same steady attention I had been giving her for 16 years, while she had looked at me and seen someone she could manage. Cordelia filed for divorce 11 days later. Her attorney was aggressive and well-prepared, and had clearly been briefed on the expectation that Mercer estate law was a significant financial target. He filed motions. He requested documentation. He demanded discovery on the firm's assets with the confident energy of a man who expected to find a great deal worth dividing. What he found was an irrevocable trust, executed 9 years prior, with language that my own attorney, Barrett Hale, described without irony as nearly surgical. The firm was not marital property. It never had been. The professional structure I had built, the same kind of structure I had built for dozens of clients over decades of practice, had done exactly what it was designed to do. My personal accounts, after 16 years of marriage, represented the legitimate marital estate. The settlement was fair. I did not fight to pay less than I owed under the law, and I did not agree to pay more than was required. I paid what the math demanded. I was done. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon in late spring, 8 months after the will reading. I signed the final documents in Barrett Hale's office overlooking the Cooper River in Charleston, took the drive back along Highway 17 as the evening came in low and gold over the marsh grass, and arrived in Savannah in time to have dinner alone at a restaurant on Congress Street, where the white tablecloths are always crisp and the shrimp is always local. I ordered a glass of bourbon. I thought about Evelyn. I thought about a kitchen hallway and a Tuesday afternoon that had changed the entire trajectory of everything that came after it. Cordelia and her sisters retained separate counsel and mounted a challenge to the Charitable Remainder Trust. Their attorneys were sharp. They made a genuine effort. Georgia trust law, however, is not a venue that is forgiving of challenges against properly constructed documents, particularly when those documents were drafted by someone who has spent 3 decades understanding exactly where challenges succeed and exactly where they don't. The challenge was dismissed. The Savannah Education Foundation received its first distribution 6 weeks later, $112,000, which funded 11 scholarships for the incoming academic year at Savannah State University and Armstrong campus. The local paper ran a brief item about the gift. The scholarships were named the Evelyn Dray Fund for First Generation Achievement. I read the article at my desk on a Thursday morning with the kind of coffee I only allow myself on days when something is genuinely worth noting. My paralegal, Harriet, who has worked with me for 14 years and knows the rhythms of this office better than most people know their own homes, came to my doorway that morning and looked at the newspaper clipping I'd left on the corner of my desk. "She would have liked seeing that in print," Harriet said. "She would have said it was too sentimental," I replied. "And then she would have liked it." Harriet smiled and went back to her desk. I have been asked by more than one person since all of this became quietly known in the way things become known in a city like Savannah, whether I feel satisfaction about how it ended. Whether I planned it, whether I knew, standing in that hallway with my briefcase, what was eventually going to unfold in Preston Wolf's conference room. The honest answer is no. I could not have predicted it. Evelyn made her own decisions about her estate, as clients always do, for reasons that were entirely and completely her own. My obligation to her, as her attorney, had been to execute her wishes with precision and to ensure those wishes were legally protected. That is what I did. That is all I did. What I knew, standing in the hallway, was simpler than a plan. I knew that I had spent my entire career building instruments of protection for other people's legacies, and that I had quietly, methodically done the same for my own. I knew that patience, in law and in life, is not passivity. It is the deliberate work of someone who understands that the right moment to act is almost never the moment when your emotions are at their loudest. And I knew that Evelyn Dray was a woman of extraordinary precision, and that she had chosen me, out of everyone in her life, to be the person who held what she'd built. I had not wanted to let her down. The scholarships go out every year now, 11 in the first year, 14 in the second, as investment returns allowed for modest growth. Last fall, I attended the Foundation's annual recognition ceremony, held in a restored ballroom on Abercorn Street, a building I had, as it happens, helped facilitate the estate transfer for many years ago, when the previous owner's family couldn't agree on what to do with it. I sat in the back row and watched 11 young people receive their award letters. Most of them had no idea, standing there in their good clothes with their families taking photographs, that the money flowing to them had originated in the disciplined savings of a retired school principal in Ardsley Park, who had never earned more than $60,000 in a single year of her life, and who had understood, better than almost anyone I have ever met, that what you build and what you protect are not the same conversation, and that both require the same quality of care. I thought about her for a long time that night. I am 52 years old. I will practice estate law for another decade at least, if my health allows, and the work continues to mean what it means. I drive through Savannah in the mornings, and I see the things I have helped families hold together. The names on the doorplates of firms whose succession planning I've managed. The community organizations whose endowments I structured to outlast the people who built them. The trusts that will pay out decades from now, honoring intentions formed by people who are already gone. This is what my profession is, at its heart. Not the paperwork, not the fees. It is about the distance between what people say they want and what they actually take the time to protect, and about the rare, irreplaceable gift of being the person someone places at the center of their most important document, not because you asked for it, and not because you are the most obvious choice, but because you are the right one. Cordelia did not know that about me. She had known a version of me, the predictable professional, The quiet husband, the man who came home and ate dinner and asked about her day without making any particular demands on her attention. She had not known the attorney. She had not known what I had built, or how carefully, or why. Evelyn knew. That, in the end, was enough. This is the ultimate lesson in strategic patience. Cordelia made the fatal mistake of treating her husband like a predictable asset rather than a master of his craft. She planned to bleed him dry, forgetting that Augustine's entire life was dedicated to protecting legacies from people exactly like her. Augustine didn't need a confrontation. He had a document. By the time Cordelia realized her mother had bypassed her for a charitable trust, the game was already over. Augustine didn't just protect his firm. He protected his mother-in-law's legacy from her own greedy daughters. The takeaway? Never mistake a man's quiet nature for a lack of defenses. While Cordelia was planning a heist, Augustine was perfecting a fortress. She thought she was marrying a provider. She found out she was married to a fortress.